Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a pretty big topic, evolution and adaptation.
Yeah, definitely big.
You sent in a really fascinating mix of stuff, everything from dense scientific papers on how life changes to, how scientists date ancient remains.
Right, like the radiocarbon dating material.
Exactly. And even some of the ongoing debates and, frankly, skepticism around evolution, including creationist arguments.
That's quite the range.
It really is. So our goal here is just to unpack all of it, pull out the main ideas, see where things connect, understand the disagreements, but importantly, without getting bogged down in any political angles.
Absolutely. Just laying out the information from the sources. We've got research articles, info from a dating lab, and those online discussions reflecting public views.
Right. So for you listening, the plan is basically to get a clearer picture of these pretty complex subjects. We want to hone in on key concepts like natural selection and also this thing called phenotypic plasticity, which sounds interesting.
It is, yeah.
And also try to understand why these debates about evolution are still so active, even with, a lot of scientific evidence out there. Aiming for insightful, not overwhelming. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start?
Well, I think maybe starting with the basics, understanding adaptation and natural selection feels like the right place.
Good call. That's really the foundation for a lot of this.
Okay, so I was looking at some definitions, and natural selection, well, the core idea seems pretty intuitive, actually.
Uh-huh.
Organisms that can't cope when their environment changes. They're just less likely to survive and, have offspring.
Makes sense. Survival of the fittest, in a way, though that term can be loaded.
Right. But the ones that can adapt, because maybe they have some useful genetic trait, they do better. They survive, reproduce, and pass on those helpful traits.
Exactly. And over long periods, this shifts the whole species. It's these advantageous mutations, small genetic changes, that provide the raw material.
Okay, let's make this more concrete. The source had some good examples.
Yeah, those really help. Think about giraffes. If the low-hanging leaves vanish, only the ones with slightly longer necks can reach the higher stuff,
Ah, right. So they eat, they survive, they have baby giraffes.
who likely inherit those longer necks. And boom, over generations, giraffe necks get longer. The environment basically selected for longer necks.
Okay. And there was another one about rats in trees.
Yeah, rats living on branches, spaced a certain way. Selection would favor rats that are like the perfect size to jump between them.
Too small, can't make the jump. Too big, might break the branch or fall.
Precisely. So the just right rats thrive, and eventually that size becomes common in that specific population.
And the bug example too, classic. Birds eating the red bugs more easily than the green ones.
Means the green ones are more likely to survive, reproduce, pass on the greenness. Predator pressure changing the population's color. Simple, clear, natural selection.
Yeah, these examples really drive home how the environment isn't just there. It's actively shaping which traits succeed.
Absolutely. And the source also mentioned lizards with longer legs in flood zones helps them escape.
Right, or things we see happening now, like insects becoming resistant to pesticides.
Or antibiotic resistance in bacteria. Those are powerful examples because we can actually see evolution happening on a human timescale, driven by a really specific pressure we've introduced.
Yeah, that's a bit scary, actually. But it all comes back to that core biological drive, doesn't it? Survival and reproduction.
Fundamentally, yes. It's the difference in who survives and reproduces successfully, the ones fittest for their specific environment right then, that fuels the whole process of evolutionary change.
Okay, so that's natural selection. But the sources also bring up something else. Phenotypic plasticity. What's that about?
Ah, yes. This is a really fascinating layer. Basically, it's the ability of one organism with a single set of genes, its genotype, to show different traits or phenotypes.
Phenotypes meaning like physical characteristics.
Or behaviors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Observable traits. So the same genotype can produce different phenotypes depending on the environment it finds itself in. So same genetic blueprint, but different outcomes depending on the conditions.
Precisely. And the key idea from the source is that this plasticity can be another way organisms adapt, working alongside or sometimes instead of genetic evolution. And importantly, it can be fast.
Faster than waiting for genetic mutations to spread.
Potentially much faster, yeah.
Yeah.
An organism might be able to adjust its body or behavior almost immediately to cope with a change.
Okay, that sounds pretty useful. But the paper also said it's not always a good thing. It mentioned ecological traps.
Right, that's the catch. Sometimes a plastic response can actually lure an organism into a worse situation.
How so? Can you give an example? Like being flexible is bad.
Well, imagine insects that use plant smell to find the right place to lay eggs. That's a plastic learned behavior.
Okay.
Now, humans introduced the new invasive plant that smells similar, but it's
Wow.
actually toxic to the larva. The insect's flexibility laying eggs on this new plant because it smells right becomes a trap. It leads to reproductive failure.
Wow, okay, so the flexibility backfires. The source also said plasticity can sometimes hinder adaptation by shielding the population from natural selection. That sounds backward.
It does seem counterintuitive at first, but think about it. If organisms can successfully cope with a new environment just by being flexible, by changing their behavior or physiology,
Wow.
then there's less selective pressure favoring those individuals who happen to have beneficial genetic mutations for that new environment.
Ah, I see. Because the flexible ones are surviving and reproducing anyway, even without the better genes.
Exactly. The plasticity lets them get by, so the underlying genetics might not adapt as quickly or as thoroughly as they might have otherwise. It's like using a temporary fix that prevents a more permanent, optimized solution from evolving.
That makes sense, like a crutch, you said earlier.
Okay.
And the paper mentioned different types of plasticity,
Right.
operating on different timescales.
Yeah. There's behavioral plasticity, changing behavior that can be really quick, activational, but maybe costly in terms of energy. Or it can be developmental, a slower change locked in as the organism grows.
Okay. And then TGP, transgenerational plasticity. That sounds complicated.
It's really cool, actually. TGP means the environment experienced by the parents can affect the traits of their offspring, even without changing the DNA sequence itself.
Wait, how? Like passing on experiences?
Sort of. It often involves epigenetic changes, modifications to how genes are switched on or off. These epigenetic tags can sometimes be passed down. So the offspring is sort of pre-adapted based on what their parents went through. The paper suggests TGP operates on a slower timescale, closer to genetic evolution.
Huh. So environmental effects echoing across generations. Wild. The paper also noted that the most adaptive plasticity, the really helpful kind, might be the most costly or slowest to develop.
Right, suggesting a trade-off. Investing heavily in being super flexible might limit resources for other things or might slow down the rate at which the population fine-tunes its genes through natural selection for that specific environment.
Okay, this is getting really complex. And then it connected plasticity to sexual selection. How does flexibility affect mating?
Well, the idea is that some traits potential mates find attractive, especially in males, might actually be signals of how adaptable that individual is.
So, like, showing off your flexibility.
In a way, yeah. They mentioned spadefoot toads, where aspects of the male's call related to how flexible his offspring were. And those more flexible offspring did better.
So females might be choosing mates whose traits suggest their kids will be adaptable. That's amazing.
It suggests that. And the stickleback fish example, fathers raised in warmer water, had sons who were more successful at mating in warmer water.
A direct link between the father's environment and the son's reproductive success through TGP.
Exactly. And interestingly, in those warmer conditions, females preferred smaller males, regardless of their own size. So environmental stress can even shift mating preferences, highlighting how flexible reproductive strategies can be.
Wow. Okay, so plasticity is this whole complex layer interacting with genetics, environment, even mating. Right, let's shift gears. How do we know when all this stuff happened? That brings us to dating methods like radiocarbon dating.
Precisely.